Have you ever really wondered how a digital heist goes down? I'm not talking about the flashy movie version, but the real methodical process that's behind some of the biggest data breaches we've ever seen. Well, let's get into it, because it turns out most of these cyber attacks, they follow a very specific playbook.
40 million. Back in 2013, that was the number of credit and debit card accounts that were compromised in the huge Target data breach. It's just a staggering number that completely shattered consumer trust, ended up costing the company hundreds of millions of dollars, and left people all over the country feeling vulnerable. So the question is, how does an attacker actually get from the outside all the way to the crown jewels of a massive company like Target? You'd think it would be impossibly complex, right? And yet, the path they take is often surprisingly predictable. And the reason it's so predictable is because attackers are often following a framework. Think of it as an instruction manual for a hack. And by understanding this playbook, we can actually learn how to tear it up. This playbook has a name. It's called the cyber kill chain, and it's actually a concept that was borrowed from the military and then adapted for cybersecurity back in 2011 by the aerospace company Lockheed Martin. The whole idea is to break down any advanced attack into a series of distinct phases. Now, you really got to pay attention to the word chain. For an attack to succeed, the bad guy has to successfully get through every single one of these sequential phases. And for defenders, this is a massive advantage. You know why? Because you only need to break one single link in that chain to stop the entire attack in its tracks. So, here they are, the 7 links in that chain. We're going to walk through each one, from the very first planning stages all the way to the final goal. You can think of it as the 3 acts of our digital heist story. So our story kicks off with the first 3 phases. This is all the prep work. This is the attacker quietly planning everything out, preparing their tools long before they ever even think about knocking on the door. The very first phase is reconnaissance. And, to really get inside the mind of an attacker, let's just call ours Megatron, like in the source material. Megatron's first job is pure research. He's out there gathering any publicly available information he can find to create a really detailed map of his target. And Megatron does this in a couple of ways. First, there's passive recon. This is kind of like watching a building from across the street. You're scraping social media, looking up public records. The best part for him, it's totally undetectable. Then there's active recon, which is more like rattling the doorknobs, directly scanning the target's network to see what's open. It's a bit riskier for him, but it can give him much more detailed info. Okay, once Megatron has his intel, it is time for weaponization. This is where he's in his workshop, actually building his tool. He takes a vulnerability he found, that's the exploit, and he bundles it with a piece of malware that's going to give him access, that's the backdoor. This weapon could be anything, really, from a cleverly disguised Word document to some highly sophisticated custom-built program. Phase 3 is all about delivery. The weapon's built, so how does he get it to the target? Well, the most common way, by a long shot, is a phishing email. But he could also use a physical USB drive just left in a parking lot, or something called a watering hole attack, where he compromises a website that he knows his targets go to all the time. He's basically poisoning the well they all drink from. All right, all that prep work is done. Time for Act 2, the break-in. This is where all the attackers' planning pays off, and they finally get their initial foothold inside the target's network. Exploitation. This is the moment of truth. An employee clicks the link, they open the infected document, or they visit the compromised website. The weapon is triggered, the vulnerability is exploited, and just like that, Megatron's malicious code is running on a machine inside the network. He's in. So what do these triggers actually look like? Well, it could be a malicious macro in an Office document. It could be a 0-day exploit, and that's a really nasty one. It targets a vulnerability that's so new, the software developer has literally had 0 days to create a patch for it. Or it could just be a simple, old, unpatched vulnerability that the company just forgot to fix. But look, just getting in is only half the battle. If the user reboots their machine or some security tool spots that initial entry, Megatron could get kicked right back out. So the next phase, installation, is all about making sure that doesn't happen. He needs to establish what we call persistence. And this is how they do it, how they can hide in plain sight. They might install something called a web shell on a server. It's just a script that looks like a normal file, but it gives them remote access. Or they can mess with the Windows registry, adding what's called a run key, which forces their malware to launch every single time the computer starts up. Basically, they're making themselves a part of the system. All right, so our attacker is in and he secured his access. This brings us to the final act, the getaway. This is where Megatron establishes long-term control and finally gets to do what he came here to do in the first place.
Now, to operate, Megatron needs a reliable connection. This is the command and control phase, or what you'll always hear called C2. His malware starts beaconing out from that compromised computer to a server that he controls somewhere on the internet. And this creates a hidden channel that allows him to send commands in and pull data out, all remotely. And this is how they stay so hidden. You know, old school C2 channels were pretty easy to spot, but modern attackers are smart. They use common web traffic like HTTP and HTTPS, or they even hide their commands inside of DNS requests. Their malicious traffic just becomes a needle in a massive haystack of legitimate activity.
And with that secure hidden channel now established, we arrive at the final phase, actions on objectives. This is it. This is the payoff. After all that hard work, Megatron can now finally achieve his ultimate goal.
So what is the goal? Well, most of the time, it's data exfiltration, stealing sensitive information, just like those 40 million credit cards from Target. But it could also be collecting employee passwords, escalating privileges to become an administrator, or even just deleting critical files and backups to cause chaos. Okay, so we've walked through the entire playbook from the attacker's point of view. Now, let's flip the script. Because the real power of the kill chain isn't for the attackers, it's for us, the defenders.
And this right here is the most important takeaway. Every single phase we just discussed is an opportunity to detect and stop the attack. If you train employees to spot phishing emails, boom, you just broke the delivery link. If you patch your vulnerabilities, you break the exploitation link. You monitor your network traffic for weird stuff, you can break the command and control link.
And really, that's what this all comes down to. The cyber kill chain gives us a map of the attack. It lets us ask the most important question in security. Now that you know their playbook, where is your weakest link? Because you can bet that's exactly where the attackers are going to be aiming.